The room went quiet when my sister said it, not angry quiet. The kind of quiet where people pretend to laugh because they are not sure if something cruel just happened. She held her wine glass in one hand, smiling like she had just shared a harmless joke. "You are not really wedding material," she said. A few people chuckled. Someone looked down at the table. I remember noticing the sound of cutlery against porcelain, very soft, very careful. No one corrected her. No one asked why she would say that. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel like a kindness. "Some people are just meant to watch other people build families." What she did not know, what no one at that table knew, was that every venue in the place she dreamed of getting married answered to me. Most people in my family describe me the same way. Quiet, reliable, predictable. They never say those words with cruelty, but they also never say them with admiration. It is the kind of description people use when they have already decided that your role in the room is small. I learned early that silence creates space for observation. When you speak less, people forget you are there. And when people forget you are there, they stop performing. They become honest in ways they do not intend. My sister, Alina, had never learned that lesson. She filled every room she entered. Her voice carried easily over conversations, over music, over the soft clinking of glasses at family dinners. People listened to her without being asked to. She had a way of telling stories that made even ordinary events feel dramatic. If someone spilled coffee at work, Alina could turn it into a 10-minute story about office politics. If someone broke up with a boyfriend, Alina could turn it into a moral lesson about loyalty. People admired that about her. Our parents did too. At family gatherings, my mother often watched Alina the way people watch someone performing on stage. Proud, entertained, certain that everyone else in the room must feel the same way. I never resented it, not really. Alina had always been louder than me, even as children. When we were younger, teachers described her as confident. They described me as thoughtful. Both words sound positive, but they do not carry the same weight in a room full of people. Confidence is visible. Thoughtfulness is quiet. By the time we were adults, the pattern had settled into something comfortable for everyone. Alina told the stories. I listened. Alina explained how the world worked. I asked questions when something did not make sense. It created the illusion that she understood more than I did. No one ever asked what I spent my time doing. That was never said directly, but it was always implied. At family dinners, conversation usually moved through predictable topics: work, relationships, plans for the future. My father liked asking questions that sounded casual but carried quiet expectations. "Are you seeing anyone these days?" He asked it the way people ask about the weather. I usually gave the same answer. "Not seriously." He would nod and move on. Alina, on the other hand, never gave short answers. When she started dating someone, the entire table learned his name, his career plans, his family background, and the small personality traits that made him interesting. By the time dessert arrived, everyone felt like they had already met him. Her life unfolded in stories. Mine unfolded in routines. Most mornings began the same way. I woke early before most of the city had decided what kind of day it would become. The quiet hours were easier to think in, fewer interruptions, fewer conversations that required polite explanations. My work demanded attention to details most people never noticed: schedules, contracts, operational systems that had to function the same way every single day, regardless of who was celebrating inside the buildings they supported. The people attending those events rarely thought about what made them possible. They saw the lights, the music, the decorations, the view. They never saw the systems behind them. I preferred it that way. Recognition complicates things. Systems work best when they remain invisible. Our family dinners usually happened once a month, nothing formal. Just a habit my mother insisted on maintaining even after both Alina and I had moved out years earlier. That particular evening looked like every other one at first. The table was already set when I arrived. My mother had chosen the good plates again, the ones she only used when she expected the conversation to last longer than usual. Alina was already there, sitting with the relaxed posture of someone who had arrived early enough to start shaping the mood of the room. She waved when she saw me. "Finally," she said. "I was starting to think you forgot. I said I would come." "You always say that," she replied, smiling. Her fiancé was sitting beside her, Daniel. He stood when I approached, offering a polite handshake. He had the careful manners of someone still learning how our family worked. People like Daniel always took time to understand the dynamics. Alina introduced him to everyone the way she introduced most things in her life, with enthusiasm that left little room for quiet observation. "This is the brother I told you about," she said. I noticed she did not say my name immediately, just the role, the brother. Daniel smiled warmly. "It's good to finally meet you." "You too." That was enough for me. Dinner began the way it always did. Small conversations layered over each other, my father asking about work. My mother reminding everyone to eat before the food cooled. Alina directing the rhythm of the table with stories about wedding planning. At that point, everything still felt normal, comfortable, predictable. I had no reason to believe that evening would become the moment everyone in the room would remember later. The moment when something quiet about me, something no one at that table had ever taken seriously, would eventually become impossible for them to ignore. But that realization had not arrived yet. At that moment, I was simply sitting at the table, listening, the way I always did. After that dinner, nothing dramatic happened. There was no argument, no confrontation, no moment where anyone acknowledged that Alina's words had crossed a line. The evening ended the way family dinners usually end. Plates stacked in the kitchen. My mother insisting she did not need help cleaning. My father discussing traffic with Daniel near the front door. Normal rituals. But something about the atmosphere had shifted in a way that was difficult to explain. People were careful around me, not apologetic, just careful. When conversations paused, someone would quickly start a new topic. When I spoke, there was a slight delay before anyone responded, as if they were measuring their words more carefully than usual. It was subtle. Most people would not have noticed it. Silence makes small changes easier to hear. Alina did not seem to notice any difference at all. Over the next few weeks, the family group chat filled with updates about her wedding plans, photographs of dress fittings, links to decoration ideas, long voice messages describing venues she had visited. My mother responded to every message with enthusiasm. My father added occasional comments that sounded supportive even when he clearly did not understand the details. I mostly read the messages without replying. That was normal for me. If anyone noticed my absence in the conversation, they did not mention it. The first moment of real discomfort came during another dinner 2 weeks later. This one was smaller. Just Alina, Daniel, and me at a restaurant she liked near the waterfront. The place was busy enough that conversations blended into a soft background noise. Plates moved across tables. Glasses touched gently. A piano played somewhere near the bar. Alina seemed energized. Wedding planning had given her a new subject to dominate. "I saw the most incredible venue last week," she said, leaning forward across the table. Daniel smiled patiently. He had heard several versions of this story already. "You say that about every venue," he said. "This one was different." "How?" "The view," she said immediately. "You could see the entire coastline. It looked like something from a movie. She pulled out her phone and showed us photographs. The building stood on a cliff above the water, large glass windows, stone terraces, soft lighting across an open reception space. It was beautiful. Daniel studied the photos carefully. It looks expensive. Alina laughed. Everything good is expensive. She looked at me then. Have you ever been somewhere like this? The question sounded casual, but there was something in her tone that made it feel slightly pointed. I've seen places like it, I said. That is not the same as understanding them, she replied. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. He seemed unsure if the comment had been meant as a joke. Alina continued speaking before anyone could react. The problem is availability, she said. Places like this book years in advance. That makes sense, Daniel said. She nodded, but there was frustration in the movement. I contacted 3 planners already. They all say the same thing. What? No open dates. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table. Apparently that entire coastline is controlled by a few private venue groups. If you are not already in their system, you are basically invisible. The word invisible hung in the air for a moment. She smiled again, but the smile carried a faint edge. You would not believe how difficult it is to even get someone to respond to inquiries, she said. Daniel shrugged. That probably means they are popular. Or arrogant. Her eyes moved toward me again. You would hate dealing with something like that, she added. Why? You do not like pushing people. I did not answer immediately. She continued before I could. You have always been comfortable letting other people take the lead, she said. That is not really how things work in the wedding world. Daniel laughed softly, trying to smooth the moment. I think planning a wedding would stress anyone. Alina nodded but did not drop the subject. Some people just are not built for that kind of pressure, she said. You have to fight a little to get what you want. She said it lightly, almost playfully. But there was a quiet implication beneath the words, an assumption, one she seemed very comfortable repeating. I watched the way Daniel looked between us, trying to understand if something had just happened. He did not ask questions. Most people do not. They assume family members understand each other better than outsiders ever could. Alina continued describing venues for the rest of the evening. Different locations, different views, different planners who had apparently failed to secure the place she wanted. Each story ended the same way: frustration, dismissal, a sense that someone somewhere was making her life unnecessarily difficult. By the time we left the restaurant, she seemed convinced that the system surrounding those venues was unfair, unresponsive, possibly incompetent. She said it several times while we walked toward the parking lot. I do not understand how these places operate, she said. The wind from the water moved softly through the street. Daniel squeezed her hand reassuringly. You will find something, he said. Alina sighed. I should not have to settle. I listened quietly, because I did understand how those places operated, very clearly. And I knew something Alina did not, something she had already come closer to than she realized. But it was still early. Too early for anyone to see the shape of the truth, even her. The first real warning did not come from Alina. It came from a system notification. 3 weeks after that dinner by the waterfront, I was reviewing weekly reports in my office. The process was routine. Every Monday morning, the same files appeared in the same order: venue occupancy, vendor schedules, maintenance logs, and incoming event inquiries. Most of those inquiries were handled automatically. Our venues operated through a layered structure. Clients rarely contacted owners directly. Instead, planners submitted requests through coordinators who verified availability through centralized booking systems. If a date was available, the process moved forward. If it was not, the system declined the request. Efficient, quiet, impersonal. Exactly how it was designed to be. That morning, one entry in the inquiry log paused my attention for a moment longer than usual, not because of the name, because of the number of attempts. The same event request had appeared 3 times within 48 hours. 3 different planners, 3 different contact emails, but the event description was identical. Spring wedding, 200 guests, preferred venue, Cliffside Terrace, preferred date, early June. The system had already rejected the request twice. The third attempt was still waiting for review. I opened the details out of habit. The planner submitting the request had left a short note in the internal comments section. Client extremely motivated to secure location, willing to negotiate pricing if necessary. That sentence alone was not unusual. Planners wrote variations of it every week, but beneath the comment was the client name, Elena Martinez. For a moment, I simply looked at the screen, not surprised, just aware. Cliffside Terrace was the venue she had shown us on her phone at the restaurant. The one with the glass walls overlooking the water. The one she said looked like something from a movie. The one she had described with so much frustration when planners could not secure a date. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Our system did not prioritize clients based on enthusiasm, or family connections, or desperation. It followed the same rules for everyone: availability, scheduling order, operational capacity. The date she wanted had been booked for over a year, a corporate event. 3-day reservation, fully contracted. The system had rejected her request because the date simply did not exist anymore. No emotion involved, just logistics. Still, something about the multiple submissions caught my attention. 3 different planners suggested Alina had not accepted the first answer she received. She had gone looking for alternatives, different pathways into the same system. I checked the earlier inquiries more carefully. The first planner had submitted a simple request. Rejected. The second had asked if any cancellation lists were available, also rejected. The third planner, the one currently waiting for review, had added a longer note. Client insists venue must be Cliffside Terrace. States family connection may exist with ownership group, requests confirmation. I read that sentence twice. Family connection. I had not told Alina anything about my work beyond the simplest descriptions. When people asked, I usually said I worked in event operations. That explanation was accurate enough. Most people did not ask for details after that. Alina certainly never had. Her interests usually stayed focused on more visible parts of life. Relationships, celebrations, stories, but someone had told her something, or she had assumed it. Either way, the comment had entered the system now, and systems remember everything. I approved the final rejection. A short automated message would reach the planner within minutes. Requested date unavailable. No alternative availability within requested time frame. Clear, professional, neutral. I closed the inquiry window and continued reviewing the rest of the weekly reports. But the notification had already done something subtle. It had shifted my attention. Later that afternoon, another message appeared in my internal inbox. This one came directly from a venue coordinator who managed several of our coastal properties. Her note was brief. Quick question regarding a persistent client inquiry. She attached a screenshot from a separate conversation with a wedding planner. The planner's message was simple. My client is convinced someone in the ownership structure may know her brother. She believes that connection might help secure a date. Is there any truth to that? The coordinator had written a single reply below the message. Ownership does not participate in direct booking negotiations. Then she had forwarded the conversation to me with a short question. Do you want us to respond differently if this continues? I stared at the message for a moment. Alina believed a connection existed. Not a confirmed one, just a suspicion, but she had already begun using it. Quietly, through other people, trying to open doors the normal process had closed. That was the first real red flag, not the venue inquiry itself, not even the repeated attempts. It was the assumption beneath them. The quiet belief that if she pushed hard enough or mentioned the right relationship, the system might bend for her. I typed a short response to the coordinator. No change to procedure. Continue standard policy. I pressed send. The system would continue operating exactly as it always had. Objective, consistent, unaware of family dynamics. But for the first time since Alina made that comment at dinner, the one about me not being wedding material, I began to suspect something else. Her words that night may not have been careless. They may have been strategic. And if that was true, then the situation unfolding now was no longer just about wedding planning. It was about control. A month after the first venue inquiries appeared in the system, my mother invited everyone to dinner again. She said it had been too long since we had all sat together. In reality, it had been 4 weeks. But my mother believed problems disappeared when people shared a table long enough. I arrived a little later than the others. Alina and Daniel were already seated in the living room when I walked in. Wedding magazines were spread across the coffee table, along with printed photos of venues and decoration ideas. Alina looked tired, not physically, tense. The kind of tension people carry when too many plans refuse to cooperate. She greeted me with a quick smile. "You finally decided to join us." I said I would. "Yes, but you are always mysterious about timing." I placed my coat on the chair near the door and sat down across from them. Daniel nodded politely. Alina returned to flipping through one of the magazines. "I spent the entire morning speaking with planners," she said. "Apparently every decent venue within 3 hours is already booked." Daniel gave a sympathetic smile. "People like getting married." "Not like this," Alina replied. "This feels intentional." I watched her carefully. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "It is like these places have some kind of secret gatekeeping system." Daniel laughed softly. "Most businesses have booking systems." "That is not what I mean," she said. "It is the attitude. They act like clients should feel lucky just to be acknowledged." She turned another page sharply. "I even had one planner tell me there is a network behind the best coastal venues, a few groups controlling everything." The words were almost identical to what she had said at the restaurant weeks earlier. But now the frustration sounded deeper, more personal. My mother called from the kitchen. "Dinner will be ready in a minute." Alina leaned back on the couch. "You know what the worst part is," she said. "What?" "I actually thought I might have an advantage." Daniel looked at her curiously. "What kind of advantage?" She glanced at me briefly before answering. "A connection." Daniel followed her gaze. "Oh." The silence lasted just long enough to feel intentional. I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of connection?" Daniel asked. Alina smiled in a way that suggested she was sharing a harmless rumor. "I heard my brother might know people in that industry." Daniel raised his eyebrows slightly. "Really?" I answered before the pause could grow. "I work in event operations." "That is a very vague description," Alina said lightly. "It is accurate." She studied me for a moment, then she laughed. "I knew it." Daniel looked confused. "Knew what?" "That he would say something like that," she replied. "What does that mean?" Alina set the magazine down and leaned forward slightly. "My brother has always liked staying in the background," she said. "It is his whole personality." The statement was delivered as if it were affectionate, but the tone carried something sharper. Daniel shifted in his chair. "I do not think there is anything wrong with that." "Of course not," Alina said quickly. "But it also means he does not really understand situations like this." "Situations like what?" I asked. She waved her hand toward the wedding magazines. Negotiation, social leverage, knowing how to push when something matters. Daniel looked at me again, clearly uncomfortable. I could see the question forming behind his eyes. Was this a joke or something else? I decided to ask the question that had been sitting quietly in my mind since that first dinner weeks earlier. "Alina," I said calmly, "do you remember something you said last month?" She blinked. "What?" "At dinner. When you said I was not wedding material." For a moment the room felt very still. Daniel looked down at the table. Alina stared at me, then laughed. "Oh my God. What? You are still thinking about that? You said it in front of everyone. It was a joke. It did not sound like one." She rolled her eyes slightly. "You are doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Taking something harmless and turning it into a personal attack." Daniel spoke carefully. "I remember that comment," he said. It sounded a little strong. Alina looked at him with surprise. "You too." "I just thought maybe," she interrupted him. Seriously, it was clearly playful. Then she looked back at me. "You know how sensitive you can be about relationships." I did not say anything about sensitivity. "You did not have to," she replied. My mother entered the room then, carrying a bowl of salad. "Everything all right in here?" Alina immediately smiled. "Of course." My mother set the bowl on the table and looked between us. "You two are quiet." Alina answered before I could. "My brother thinks I insulted him a few weeks ago." My mother looked confused. "Insulted how?" Alina laughed again. "I told him he was not wedding material." My mother blinked once, then she shrugged lightly. "Well, that does sound like something you would say." "But I meant it jokingly," Alina added quickly. My mother nodded. "I am sure you did." Then she looked at me. "You know your sister teases." The conversation ended there, just like that, dismissed, redefined, rewritten. The moment I had asked about was no longer cruelty, it was humor, and the problem was no longer the words themselves, it was my reaction to them. Alina leaned back in her chair again, satisfied. "You see," she said quietly, "no one else thought it was a big deal." I looked around the room. Daniel avoided my eyes. My mother began setting plates. The conversation had already moved on. That was the moment something became very clear. Alina was not simply careless with her words. She was comfortable reshaping reality the moment it threatened her. And she believed, very confidently, that no one in the room would challenge her version of events, except the systems she had already started pushing against. The ones she did not know belonged to me. Systems rarely reveal the truth all at once. They release it in small fragments, numbers, messages, records that appear ordinary until a pattern begins forming between them. 2 weeks after that dinner at my parents' house, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet in the mornings. Only a few lights were on in the main hallway, and the cleaning staff were finishing their final rounds before the rest of the day began. I preferred those hours. The absence of conversation made it easier to think clearly. I opened the booking system and reviewed the weekly inquiry logs. Alina's name appeared again, not once, 5 times, different planners, different agencies, but the same request. Cliffside Terrace, early June. Each request carried slight variations in language, but the intention was identical. The planners were trying to find a way into a calendar that had already been closed. One of the submissions included a private message attached to the inquiry. Client insists the venue is perfect for her story. Very determined. I stared at that sentence longer than I expected to. Perfect for her story. It sounded like something Alina would say. She had always believed important moments should feel cinematic. Weddings especially. Another message appeared a few minutes later, this time forwarded by one of our senior coordinators. Her email was short. "We are receiving repeated inquiries from the same client through multiple planners. Some of the planners are beginning to ask if a personal connection exists with ownership." Below the message was a screenshot from a conversation she had with one of those planners. The planner's message read, "My client believes her brother may have influence with the venue group controlling Cliffside Terrace. She asked me to confirm whether that connection exists." The coordinator had replied with our standard line, "Ownership does not participate in individual booking negotiations. Professional, neutral." But the planner had responded again. "Understood. Client insists I verify." She says her brother works in event systems and may prefer to stay discreet. I leaned back in my chair slowly. Alina had said almost the same words during that dinner. He likes staying in the background. It was strange to see the idea appear again inside a professional communication channel, not family conversation, not casual speculation, a documented inquiry. The coordinator ended her email with a simple question. Should we escalate this? Escalation usually meant one thing: direct intervention from ownership. That rarely happened. Our venues were designed to operate without that kind of involvement. I typed a response. No escalation. Continue normal procedure. Then I paused. There was another tab open on my screen. Vendor reports. I clicked through them slowly. Event planners often left internal notes about difficult clients. Nothing public, just internal documentation used to prepare staff for potential complications. One of those notes caught my attention. It had been written by a coordinator who managed several wedding planners working with our venues. The note read, "Client frustrated with lack of access to premium venues, referred to coordinators as gatekeepers. Attempted to bypass scheduling process by requesting ownership review." Below the note was the client name, Alina Martinez. I read the rest of the entry. The coordinator had documented a phone call with one of the planners representing Alina. According to the planner, Alina had been very clear about what she wanted. Only Cliffside Terrace. No alternatives, no compromises. When the planner explained that the date was already reserved, Alina apparently responded with a question. "Do they know who my brother is?" The planner had asked for clarification. Alina's answer had been brief. "He works in their system somewhere." I sat quietly for a moment. That was the first time I saw the exact words she had used. In their system. She did not know my position, not precisely, but she believed proximity alone should matter. That belief had started influencing the way she spoke to professionals. The coordinator ended her note with one final observation. Planner appears uncomfortable continuing negotiations. May withdraw representation if client continues insisting on special access. I closed the file. Outside my office window, the morning traffic had started moving through the city, people heading to work. Deliveries arriving at nearby buildings. Normal movement, normal routines. Inside the system, Alina's requests continued appearing. Each one followed the same pattern. Planner submits inquiry. System rejects date. Planner attempts clarification. Coordinator repeats policy. The process remained consistent. No emotion, no adjustment. But something else began happening quietly behind the scenes. Some planners stopped submitting requests entirely. Others left internal notes warning colleagues about the situation. One message stood out in particular. It came from a planner who had briefly represented Alina before ending their contract. The message was not written for clients, only for internal staff. It said, "Client convinced venue access can be negotiated through family connection. Be cautious. Expectations unrealistic." The message spread through the internal communication board's planners used to share information. Not dramatic. Just a quiet warning, and warnings travel quickly inside professional networks. By the end of that week, Alina's name appeared less frequently in the inquiry system. Not because she had given up, because fewer people were willing to represent her requests. The system had begun responding in its own quiet way, not by punishing her, not by confronting her, just by recording behavior and letting professionals make their own decisions. The truth was beginning to surface, not publicly, not inside my family, but through the records Alina had unknowingly created. And records are difficult to argue with once they start accumulating. Pressure changes people in quiet ways, not immediately. At first, it shows itself in tone, a shorter message, a sharper question, a pause that lasts slightly longer than usual before someone answers. Over the next month, Alina's wedding planning became the central topic of nearly every family conversation, not because she wanted sympathy, because she wanted confirmation that the situation was unfair. Every story she told followed the same structure. She had contacted another planner. The planner had been enthusiastic at first. Then the conversation changed once venue availability became clear. The result was always the same: no cliffside terrace, no date anywhere along that stretch of coastline she had decided was perfect. My parents listened with concern. Daniel listened with patience. I listened with attention. Because while Alina described her version of events at the dinner table, I was seeing a different version unfolding inside the system. Records, email trails, internal notes. None of them dramatic, but together they told a much more precise story. One afternoon, a senior operations manager stopped by my office with a printed report. "We have a situation developing with a client inquiry," she said. I already knew which one. She placed the report on my desk. The pages contained a timeline of communication between planners, coordinators, and venue managers. Alina's name appeared several times, not as the sender, always as the client behind the request. "What is the concern?" I asked. The manager pointed to a section near the middle of the report. "This planner withdrew yesterday." The planner had left a short explanation attached to the account file. Client repeatedly requested direct access to venue ownership. Expressed belief that family connection may override booking policy. I nodded slowly. "That happens sometimes." "Yes," the manager said carefully, "but this client appears determined." She turned another page. 3 additional planners had declined representation within the same week, not hostile refusals, professional ones. They simply informed Alina they could no longer assist with her venue search. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Nothing." The manager studied my expression. "You are sure?" "Our policies exist for a reason." She nodded once. Then she gathered the papers and left my office. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. No decisions had been made because none were necessary. The system was already operating. A week later, Alina called me. That alone was unusual. We rarely spoke on the phone unless something specific needed to be discussed. Her voice sounded strained. "Are you busy?" "I have a few minutes." "Good." There was a pause before she continued. "I wanted to ask you something." "What is it?" "You work in events, right?" "Yes," she hesitated. "I have been having difficulties with venue access." "I heard." "From who?" "You have mentioned it at dinner." She sighed heavily. "It is more complicated than that." "How?" "These places act like they are protecting state secrets." I waited. "I spoke to another planner today," she continued. "She told me something interesting." "What was that?" "She said the best venues along the coast are controlled by a single operational network." "That is accurate." "And she said the people running that network prefer to stay invisible." I did not answer. Alina continued. "That sounds familiar." "How so?" "You." Her tone was half teasing, half suspicious. "You have always liked being invisible." "I prefer systems that work." That is exactly what she said. "Who?" "The planner." Alina's voice softened slightly. "Listen." I know you probably do not want to get involved in wedding planning drama. I do not. But if you happen to know someone connected to that network, she let the sentence hang unfinished. The request did not need to be spoken directly. I answered carefully. Venue bookings follow scheduling procedures. That is not what I asked. It is the answer. Another pause, longer this time. Elena, I added quietly, why is Cliffside Terrace so important? Because it is perfect. For what? For my wedding. There are other venues. Not like that one. Her voice sharpened slightly. You would understand if you cared about things like this. I care about different things. Yes, she said flatly. That is exactly the problem. I heard Daniel's voice faintly in the background asking her something. She covered the phone briefly. When she returned, her tone had changed again, calmer, controlled. Look, she said, I am not asking for favors. You are asking for influence. I am asking for information. What kind? If you know who runs that venue group, I would just like to speak with them. They do not meet with clients. How do you know? Because that is how the system works. You sound very certain. I am. Another silence. Then she laughed quietly. You really are impossible sometimes. I prefer consistent rules. Well, she said, rules can change. Sometimes. And sometimes, she continued slowly, people forget who is connected to who. I did not respond. Elena exhaled through the phone. You know what the worst part of this whole situation is? What? I genuinely thought having a brother in this industry might actually help. The sentence was delivered without anger, just disappointment, like someone realizing a tool they expected to use was not functioning. I cannot help you bypass procedures, I said. That is not what I asked. It is what you meant. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice sounded colder. You know, most people would try to help their sister. Most people would not ask their sister to break professional policy. She did not answer that. Instead, she said something else, quietly. You really are not built for this world. The line went silent a second later. She had ended the call. I placed the phone back on my desk. Outside the window, the city continued moving the same way it always did. Inside the system, Elena's requests kept appearing. But now the tone behind them had changed. More urgency, more insistence. She had started pushing harder. And pressure, when applied to systems designed to resist it, rarely produces the result people expect. After Elena ended that phone call, the silence in my office felt heavier than usual. Not dramatic, just present. I sat at my desk for several minutes without opening another report. The city outside the window moved with its usual rhythm. Cars stopping at lights, people crossing streets, deliveries arriving at buildings that would host meetings, celebrations, and quiet private moments later that evening. Events never stopped, weddings included, but the systems behind them did not change based on emotion. They changed only when someone deliberately redesigned them. For the first time since Elena began chasing Cliffside Terrace, I allowed myself to consider a different possibility. I could intervene, not publicly, not dramatically, just a small adjustment inside the system. Ownership occasionally reserved discretionary authority for unusual circumstances. A corporate client canceling unexpectedly. A scheduling conflict that required restructuring. A high-profile event requiring security considerations. Technically, I could open a conversation with operations and ask whether flexibility existed. It would not be impossible, just noticeable. And once systems bend once, people begin expecting them to bend again. I opened the internal calendar for Cliffside Terrace. The date Elena wanted appeared exactly where it had been every time I checked. Blocked. Reserved for a corporate technology conference that had secured the location 18 months earlier. 3 days. Multiple vendors. Signed contracts with cancellation penalties large enough to discourage casual changes. Replacing that event with a wedding would not simply require a decision. It would require explanations, paperwork, questions from people who rarely asked questions, and those questions would always lead back to the same point. Why? I closed the calendar. Family history began replaying quietly in my mind, not the loud moments, the small ones. Alina teasing me when we were younger because I preferred reading instead of attending parties. Alina introducing me to her friends as the quiet one. Alina explaining to relatives that I was good with systems but terrible with people. None of those statements had been openly cruel. They were observations she repeated often enough that other people accepted them as fact. Over time, those observations became assumptions. Assumptions became roles. She was the confident one. I was the quiet one. She navigated social worlds. I worked behind structures no one paid attention to. It had never bothered me before. Roles simplify relationships. But the comment she made at dinner, the one about me not being wedding material, had revealed something else beneath those assumptions. Not teasing, not humor, judgment. And when I questioned it, she had done something even more revealing. She rewrote the moment, turned it into a joke, turned my reaction into the problem. That was not carelessness. That was control. I opened the internal communication board again. More notes had appeared under Alina's inquiry record. Another planner had declined representation. The message was brief. Client unwilling to consider alternatives. Requests special access without clear basis. No insults, no complaints, just documentation. Systems never argue with people. They simply record what happens. Then they adjust quietly. By the end of that week, Alina's requests had slowed significantly. Not because she stopped trying, because fewer professionals were willing to attach their names to her inquiries. I thought again about the choice in front of me. Intervene, or allow the process to continue. Family complicates decisions like that. There is always an expectation that blood relationships should override professional boundaries. That loyalty should appear even when fairness disappears. But loyalty without respect becomes something else. It becomes permission. Permission for someone to continue behaving the same way without consequence. I remembered Alina's voice on the phone. Most people would try to help their sister. She believed help meant bending rules, quietly, without documentation, without witnesses. But the systems I had spent years building existed precisely to avoid that kind of influence. They worked because they treated every request the same way, no matter who made it. Changing that for Alina would not just help her. It would confirm something she already believed. That pressure eventually works. That connections override structures. That the quiet people in the background will eventually move things for her if she pushes hard enough. I closed the inquiry record. Then I opened the operations policy manual. Section after section described the same principle in different language. Standardized booking, equal access, operational neutrality. I did not need to read it again. I had helped design parts of it, but seeing the words there reminded me of something simple. Systems do not punish people. They just refuse to change unless there is a reason strong enough to justify the change. Alina's situation did not meet that threshold. Not legally, not operationally, not ethically. The only reason to intervene would be personal, and personal influence was exactly what she had been trying to use from the beginning. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I made the only decision that felt consistent with everything I had built. I would do nothing. No interference. No special conversations with operations. No quiet adjustments to scheduling. The system would continue exactly as designed. Neutral, impersonal, consistent. If Cliffside Terrace became available through a legitimate cancellation, Alina's request would enter the queue like everyone else's. If it did not, the answer would remain the same: unavailable. That decision did not feel like revenge. It felt like restraint. The emotional cost of it settled slowly in my chest. Not satisfaction, not anger. Just acceptance. Sometimes the most powerful choice is refusing to alter a system for someone who believes they deserve exceptions. And for the first time since Alina began chasing that venue, I understood something clearly. The outcome of this situation would not depend on anything I said. It would depend on the records she had already created. And records rarely change their story once they exist. The truth did not reach Alina through me. It reached her the same way most uncomfortable truths reach people, through someone who had no reason to protect her from it. Nearly 2 months passed after my decision to leave the system unchanged. During that time, Alina stopped mentioning Cliffside Terrace during family dinners. Not completely, but the tone had shifted. At first, she complained about planners. Then she blamed availability. Eventually, she began describing alternative venues she had visited. Gardens outside the city. Hotels near the harbor. Historic estates that looked impressive in photographs but clearly did not excite her the same way. Each option sounded like a compromise. My mother tried to encourage her. "They all look beautiful," she said one evening while scrolling through Alina's phone. Alina forced a smile. "Yes, beautiful." But there was no enthusiasm in her voice. Daniel had become quieter during these conversations. He rarely interrupted Alina's descriptions anymore. Instead, he listened carefully, occasionally asking practical questions about guest capacity or travel logistics. He seemed more interested in solving the problem than winning the argument Alina was still having with the invisible system behind those coastal venues. One afternoon, I received an internal message from one of our venue managers. Not about bookings, about a conversation. The manager wrote, "Thought you might want awareness." One of the planners who previously submitted inquiries about Cliffside Terrace had a follow-up meeting with that client today. The message included a short summary of the interaction. According to the planner, Alina had asked again whether there was any possible way to access the venue. Not necessarily the original date, any date, even a cancellation. The planner had repeated the same answer every other planner had already given her. Availability was controlled by a central operations group. Requests were processed automatically through the booking system. Ownership did not meet with individual clients. At that point, Alina apparently asked one more question. "Who actually owns these venues?" The planner had answered honestly. Not because it was confidential, because the information was public. Ownership structures for large event properties are recorded in corporate filings anyone can access if they know where to look. The planner explained that several coastal venues, including Cliffside Terrace, were operated by a parent company specializing in luxury event infrastructure. Then she mentioned something else. Something Alina had apparently not known. Ownership did not belong to a single person, but several individuals held controlling operational authority inside that company. One of those names was mine. The manager's summary ended with a simple line. Planner reports client appeared surprised by information. I read the message slowly. Then I closed the window. Later that evening, my phone vibrated. A text message from Alina, just one sentence. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "You never asked." Several minutes passed before the next message appeared. "Everyone says you control those venues," I answered carefully. "No one controls them, the system does." Another pause, then, "You knew I was trying to book Cliffside Terrace." "Yes." 3 dots appeared on the screen while she typed. Stopped. Started again. Finally, another message arrived. And you said nothing. I read that sentence twice, then I responded. You told everyone I wasn't built for that world. The reply came quickly. That was a joke. I waited before answering, long enough to let the silence exist between the messages. Then I wrote, the system treated your request the same way it treats everyone else. Several minutes passed. No typing indicator. No response. Eventually, another message appeared, shorter this time. So you could have helped. I looked at the phone for a long moment. Then I typed the final message of the conversation. I could have changed the system. Another pause. Then Alina asked the question that had probably been forming in her mind since the planner revealed the ownership structure. Why didn't you? I placed the phone on the desk beside me before answering, because the explanation was not complicated, but it was heavy. I picked up the phone again and wrote one final sentence. Because the system already knew how you treated the people inside it. This time, no reply came at all. The conversation ended the same way most quiet consequences do, without a dramatic confrontation, just information settling into place. Truth, once spoken clearly, rarely needs additional explanation, and systems, unlike people, never feel the need to argue about it. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, not on the coast. Not at Cliffside Terrace. Alina chose a historic hotel outside the city. The building had tall windows, polished floors, and gardens that looked elegant in photographs. My mother said it was beautiful, and it was, just not the place Alina had spent months describing. I arrived shortly before the ceremony began. Guests were already gathering in the courtyard. Soft music played through speakers hidden among the flowers. People spoke in quiet voices, the way they usually do before weddings start. No one seemed surprised to see me, but a few conversations paused when I walked past, not awkwardly, just briefly. Information travels quietly through families. Daniel stood near the entrance greeting guests. When he noticed me, he stepped forward and shook my hand. I'm glad you came, he said. I said I would. He nodded once. There was a pause before he spoke again. Alina's inside. I know. He hesitated, then lowered his voice slightly. She's been thinking about a lot of things lately. I imagine so. He looked like he wanted to say more, but the music shifted, signaling the ceremony was about to begin. Guests began taking their seats. I chose a chair near the back. From there, the entire courtyard was visible. Alina walked down the aisle a few minutes later. The dress was elegant. The decorations were carefully arranged. Everything looked exactly the way weddings are supposed to look. Perfect. From a distance, no one would ever guess that something had been missing from the plan she once described so confidently. During the ceremony, Alina looked straight ahead. She never looked toward the back rows, not once. After the vows, applause filled the courtyard. Guests stood. Music played again. People moved toward the reception hall. I stayed for a few minutes, long enough to see the beginning of the celebration. Then I left quietly. No one stopped me. No one asked questions. By the time I reached the parking lot, the music behind me had grown louder. Another wedding beginning its celebration. Another event running through a system designed to make moments like that possible. The difference between visible power and structural power is simple. One is performed in front of people. The other exists whether anyone acknowledges it or not. That evening, the system continued working exactly the same way it always had. And so did I.